Welcome to SHIUR 1700, Munich Havdalah, Degeneration, Regeneration. We're very grateful to have with us today members from the Hidalgo Festival, from Ensemble UNO, and from the Glyptothek, where we are here in Munich. SHIUR 1700 is a project. It's part of the Jüdisches Leben in Deutschland 1700 initiative that celebrates 1700 years of Jews in Germany. And the idea of SHIUR 1700 is not to necessarily share what you can look up on Wikipedia about Judaism or Jewish life, not to necessarily talk about the rituals and the history. You could find that out somewhere else. Instead, we want to explore the concepts and themes that lay behind our rituals and lay behind our holidays and lay behind our traditions. So today, we're going to explore the ritual of Havdalah, which means in Hebrew, separation. And Havdalah is a ceremony that marks the end of Shabbat, of the Sabbath, and the beginning of the week. It's a ceremony that occurs on Saturday night when there's 3 stars out, well after dark. And later we'll explore why that might be and some of the values behind that. But what we're going to do right now is we're going to engage in a very typical and traditional Jewish practice, which is text-based discourse. There's a value to relate to text in a way that is not only acquisitive. It's not about obtaining knowledge. Again, you can do that on your own. But there's something about sharing knowledge in real time. Literally the physical idea of holding these texts, reading them together, and seeing how we respond. Because we are always shaped by our environment. We are shaped by our history, by our bodies, by our societies, and literally by the very moment that we're in right now. And to me, it's exciting to have people here from Munich, originally from all over the world, but today, citizens of Munich, exploring these texts as artists, as creators, as people involved in this very space, in the Glyptothek. And I'm interested to share these texts and to hear your thoughts. So we're going to go around and read certain quotes that might not necessarily make sense in the beginning, but hopefully we see how they fit together. And if they don't, that's also okay. We see where it takes us. Many things are wonderful out of context. I'll invite Tom to begin.
Ben Bagbag said, turn it, for all is in it."
Thank you. This comes from Pirkei Avot, which is a Roman-era Jewish text. And I like to start a lot of my shiurim with this text, because this text introduces a very different attitude towards relating to knowledge. In this case, it's talking about the Torah, but I want to introduce the structure beyond the Torah, which is this idea of a cyclical relationship, that you have to turn something over, that knowledge is not something that is had simply because you are not the same person a moment ago as you are now, right? So even if you had it a moment ago, you're not that person a moment later. And I find this something that goes beyond text and knowledge and tradition, but also in other realms.
I think for an advice, for a discussion, it's perfect. Because turning it over, meaning the subject of the discussion, turn it over, view all points, and especially the last part, for all that's in it, especially the things you don't like. Because we tend to avoid the things we don't like in discussions and just see our point of view. Just get into the perspective of somebody else and learn from it, and that changes you.
Exactly. I'm curious when it comes to musical arrangements, how does this resonate?
Yeah, I think it happens in life, but it also happens in the profession a lot, that we are preparing stuff, or we are prepared for a certain situation, a conversation, or a rehearsal, and then in the end everything turns out very different, and we have to be open to take it and to do something totally on the other side, what we didn't expect to do, and which is sometimes even much more interesting because we opened ourselves to a very different path. And it is very important on the stage for a work with a director. If I probably wanted a scene to do in a certain way, but it's always about the exchange and about the discussion with this person, and then this scene will turn out probably completely different, and this is the beautiful thing in it, no?
Yeah.
Yeah, I also think like you, but I was thinking, and every turning or every turning we see another thing. This I was thinking about. So we turn it something and again turn it, but every time it's so unique. So each time there is another unique thing that we feel or we cannot accept, and then we see we cannot accept, but next time we see another thing. So every moment, uniquity of every moment, something like that. Because for all is in it, like we have everything is there just to see in another point of view, and to have another breathe, another meaning, another seeing. Exactly. Somehow.
Yeah. So I think if I can sum up kind of what you said, is that so much of what we see is a question of how we see. And instead of seeking the what, we might explore the how. And I think that this is one thing that I would love to, a side of Judaism that I would love to share with everybody, is so much of it is about the how.
Yeah, and I think about it, then comes attitude. Also, it depends somehow how you react, how you see. Then also, for me, I don't know.
Exactly, yeah. And I think also when it comes to music or composition, you can't blame that there's not enough notes to make your music, right? It would be a pretty lame excuse. This is kind of the appetizer for our conversation, but let's keep this in mind, because this is what I'm excited about. Is each of you is able to offer a different way to turn this over and turn this over. You're turning the text over, and the text is turning you over, and this is that wonderful duality. So we'll turn over. Why don't you read number 3? Can you do that?
There is a realm of time where the goal is not to have, but to be. not to own but to give, not to control but to share, not to subdue but to be in accord. Life goes wrong when the control of space, the acquisition of things of space, becomes our sole concern. The meaning of Shabbat is to celebrate time rather than space. 6 days a week, we live under the tyranny of things of space. On the Shabbat, we try to become attuned to holiness in time. It is a day on which we are called upon to share in what is eternal in time, to turn from the results of creation to the mystery of creation, from the world of creation to the creation of the world.
Thank you. This beautiful text comes from Abraham Joshua Heschel, who was a 20th century philosopher and theologian and rabbi whose origins were in Eastern Europe, but he studied in Germany and lived in America. He's famous not only as a Jewish thinker, but also as a civil rights activist. He marched with Martin Luther King, and he was a very important figure who bridged the gap between philosophy, theology, but also action. And what's very interesting here is he talks about Shabbat. Shabbat is our day of rest, but he sees the day of rest as taking a rest from having to own, having to acquire. Letting go, not focusing on having, but on being. Now, what happens when we let go in the ultimate sense? We also let go of meaning. The world becomes a mystery, right? How awesome is it when you experience something for the first time? It means you can't even name it. It exists in just pure being. And the minute you give it a name, the minute you tag it, the minute you put it into a box, something dies in it. And this is ecstasy. The ecstasy is when we don't name, when we don't put it into a box, when you have this, you're free from even definition. And before we comment on this, we can read the next one and we can combine the two and see that. Why don't you read number 4? That's a short one.
Once a disciple of Reb Moshe Corinna was asked what had been most important to his teacher. He replied, whatever he happened to be doing at the moment.
Thank you. So this one, this comes also from a Hasidic thinker and mystic, Reb Moshe Corinna. So a student of his was asked by somebody else, what was the most important thing for your teacher, for Reb Moshe Corinna? And what did he say? He said whatever he was doing at the moment was the most important thing. Yushan, do you have a thought on that?
I love this. I think there is something between Buddhism, our philosophy. There is something in common, with this thought. And we always, in modern time, we're always planning for the future, for the next event, for the next appointment, but we always forgot to enjoy this. We are together, or we are making music, or just making the food. It's very precious.
I think also in music, I mean, this is very relevant. You have to focus on the note at the moment. Everybody makes a mistake, but if you're going to be focusing on the previous note that you screwed up on, and if you're thinking about the next note, you're going to forget about this note.
Yeah, I think for me, the first thought was he never did something unimportant to him. So whatever he did was important, so he left aside things he didn't like, didn't care about. What he did was important to him, and everything else is just nothing that was worth caring for or thinking about, which is actually a very good idea.
There's two ways we can look at that. One way is find out what's important to you and do that. The other way is whatever you're doing, make it important. So this returns to this, the weight is on our subjectivity, or we put the weight on the objective world. I personally would take it more attuned to everything you can be important, because everything is dependent on how we see it and how we perceive it.
I also think there are probably two different approaches, like in real life or in everyday life. When we enjoy something, we really want to be in the moment and just let go and enjoy whatever we do. But for example, in classical music, it's like we have to prepare ourselves for many, many years, right? For many years, many hours, we are practicing, we are thinking about, okay, how can I sing this note? What is the right rhythm? How can I put the words in the right meaning? And then when it comes to the moment to present it, we have to let go 200%. And that is also, I think, a very, just a very big challenge in life in general, to be very disciplined, to be prepared, but then when we are on stage, to just be in that moment, what he's saying.
So I think this is excellent, and I want to connect it to the previous quote. So we talk about Shabbat. For 6 days, we're practicing normal life. We make all our mistakes. We have to think about how we're going to get food on the table. We have to think about how we're going to manage our lives in the world. But all those 6 days of suffering, pain, of growth, our investments for Shabbat, for learning how to be in the moment. And I think this is a wonderful idea that we can maybe import into our normal lives, where when we have these moments that we can't be present, instead of being frustrated about them, those are the moments that are training you for the future to be present. Because how else can we appreciate the now if we don't know what the beauty of the now? And this is why, when you look at this idea, before he says, Shabbat is a day on which we are called upon to share in what is eternal in time. The only thing that can be eternal in time is the now. Because that is eternity. The minute as long as we can continuously be experiencing the now, that's eternity. And I think it's such a powerful idea.
I feel often like the process of getting into creativity, getting into the state where you finally can get the ideas, get into the flow, is actually really painful, and is really something you have to really, really struggle for. And sometimes you're not in the moment, sometimes you're trying to kind of relieve your head of that and do other things. And so this is also why I think it's really nice to have this turn from the results of creation, because I mean it's not only like material things, it can also be ideas, it can also be creativity, to the mystery of creation, which is also like seeing what's surrounding you, being again in the moment, and letting go of this struggle. It's nice.
Yeah, so that's the idea. The 6 days, the weekdays, are when you have to deal with the results, and Shabbat is when you let go, when you experience the world in its unformed mystery. Okay? Yushan, why don't you read number 5?
Unless one learns how to relish the taste of Shabbat while still in the world, one will be unable to enjoy the taste of eternity in the world to come.
Thank you. This is again from Heschel. So what he's saying here is, unless we're able on the weekly Shabbat, on this regular Saturday, Friday night and Saturday, to experience that utopia, how else can we experience the eternity in the world to come? So meaning, it's a practice, it's an exercise. One of the challenges many of us have is we always think that the beyond is somehow unattainable, and we're incapable of achieving the beyond. I'm sure anybody who starts an instrument or learns a new language or starts a new job has this feeling of being an imposter, of being an outsider. And then, but what does any good teacher tell you? The minute you start playing music, you're a musician. The minute you start acting, you're an actor. The minute you start writing, you're a writer. The minute we start practicing utopia, we're already beginning utopia. It's in that ecstatic moment that we experience what can be. Shabbat is a foretaste of utopia. And every moment that we have within our lives it could be in a festival, it could be in a nightclub, it could be with friends, it could be in anything, it could be in a spiritual practice. According to this attitude, its purpose is not to leave us with that feeling of what we're going to lose, but leave us with that feeling of what can happen and what can be. And I think it's one of the things that's amazing in our era, is that we have all these festivals. We have fusion, we have, I think I've never heard of so many festivals as I have in the last like 5 years, you know? I remember when I was a kid, I would hear about in the 1960s, like Woodstock, and I wish we had stuff like that. But now I think it's come back, you know, even more. And also club culture too. And what's interesting is that on the one hand, it's wonderful. You have all these places where you can experience the ecstatic, where you can experience the here and now. On the other hand, they create bubbles where we withdraw from our world and we enter these spaces, and then we go back into the normal world. And the question is, do we bring that festival vibe, if you want to call it that? Do we bring that taste of ecstasy, of utopia? And when I say ecstasy, obviously I'm not speaking about the drug, I'm talking about the feeling of, you know, the supernal bliss. Do we bring that with us outside of the club, outside of the festival? And that's what this Havdalah ceremony that we're going to explore in a bit is about. We've experienced Shabbat, we experienced bliss, we experienced all of that. But do we take it with us when it gets dark?
I think when we lose control in a club or at a festival, as you say, we lose control because we are with so many other people who want the same in that right moment. So we hear the same music, we drink the same drinks, we all want to enjoy and be in a different universe. And then we kind of go back to this normal life where we are alone, kind of alone. I mean, more alone than in a club, or we don't have this loud music anymore and this bass under our feet or this unity of people. And so it's much more scary to let go, to say, if I let go now, I don't know what's going to happen, right? So I'm an open book and I can't force anything anymore. So sometimes I think people, or myself at least, I am too scared to lose control because I don't know what's going to happen. But I know this is the only way for me to approach something or to get more free in my art or in my life with other people. So
I think you're pretty much explaining why Jews have all these traditions. If we don't have Shabbat, then we get sucked into that vortex of nothingness, of just work. If we only work and we don't have this moment of withdrawal, then it's unsustainable. So we have to have a balance. And this is exactly what you're saying, how without having that community, how do you have it? So we have this tradition that we say once a week from sunset until 3 stars, for about 25 hours, we have that exercise in ecstasy. But then we acknowledge that we have to go back. We can't live life in such a way. And that's what Havdalah is about. But we want to bring that light into the week. So we'll read a bit more. Why don't you read number 8? Yeah.
What is important now is to recover our senses. We must learn to see more, to hear more, to feel more. The aim of all commentary on art now should be to make works of art and, by analogy, our own experience more rather than less real to us. The function of criticism should be to show how it is what it is, even that it is what it is, rather than to show what it means. In place of a hermeneutics, we need an erotics of art.
Thank you. This is from Susan Sontag, an important Jewish American thinker, from her very famous essay Against Interpretation. What does that mean? We need an erotics of art. It's interesting. I think today there's an enormous weight placed on critical analysis, on meaning, and trying to explain everything and to neatly reduce things to what they really are. and what they really stand for. And Sontag is arguing against that. She's saying we have to relate to art experientially. And I think I personally think that this recovery of our senses is something that is very relevant to our times. And it's something that Shabbat is about. This idea of eating, sleeping, singing, drinking, if you're in the traditional context, enjoying sex, dance, and many other sensory things. Even the way we relate to knowledge is sensory. This, like we said right now, we're engaging in text, not because there's an exam, but just to take pleasure in that text. Just like when you walk through a museum, you don't have to explain what every statue is. You can experience the grandeur of the statue. And what's very interesting too, and this is related to where we are, is Plutarch and other Romans, they associated the Jewish Sabbath with the cult of Dionysius or Bacchus. They saw the Jews as either worshippers in the Dionysian rite, or in similar ways, because they saw Jews would engage in their body. They would have a kind of eros to how they related to life on Shabbat, which is very different than this idea of connecting on a deeply distant level, saying that heaven is not on earth but above. This idea of that heaven is something that is realized in social interactions, in material life.
Yeah, but then again, this enjoying the moment is the same thing, no? Like feeling an erotic of arts or sensuality of arts happens if you let go of your foresee whatever might happen. You can only be sensual or if you are in the moment.
Ma barque vagabonde et regret de l'ordre mi conduisit un jour il est toute petite mais la fille qui l'habite gentiment nous invite à faire le la
in Jewish tradition, there is a lot of intellectualism. There's a lot of thinking through things and thinking a lot about things. So, and I think this is also a way people look on Judaism, and I mean, having this kind of counterpoint installed within the religion is kind of interesting, and maybe even gives more space to dig deeper into intellectualism on the other hand.
Yeah, excellent point. I mean, I think that's one of the ironies, is that sometimes by putting such a rigid emphasis on practice, right? Like we say, Shabbat is every Friday night to Saturday night. Havdalah begins on Saturday night. We have all these rituals that we do. Somebody from the outside can say, well, how constricting. Instead, you should just understand something and internalize that value, right? Why do you need to practice something? You just think it or believe it. But what we are saying is that thing that you think or believe will change over time. And we'll discover new meanings by performing the practice rather than by having to attach ourselves to some essence that becomes old and stale and not meaningful, which is one of the things that is quite interesting in some of the art that we've looked at today.
Which again leads us back to turn it.
Exactly, exactly. You know, there's things here that had a completely different meaning in the past. And ironically, we're able to preserve them by not preserving the meaning, but by preserving the structure. There's a certain paradox there.
Still, it lets us reconnect to the meaning it may have had and see it, I mean, as we do today, interpret it in another way or in an artistic different way and create new works of art with it.
So it's the meaning it never had, and that's the beauty.
Yeah, I think this, for me, I'm rather new to all these thoughts. So, but the structure, or the idea of Shabbat just taking a step back from everything, mystery of creation, so kind of the train of thought, or let your thoughts wander. So something new in your head, and get these new thoughts into the next week. And also sometimes just feel it and not think too much about it, because that's what you do all week. All week you have to think about how it's working, how it's done, and just take one day off and just enjoy the food, enjoy the company, and just feel how happy life can be.
And also, you can see where it will take you. You know, this is the point of transformation. And this is why Havdalah is so important, because we realize that we cannot stay in Shabbat forever. We have to go out into the world. But we can take what we gained in Shabbat, this idea of absolute presence, this idea of an erotic relationship, one that is not mediated through intellect or through traditional forms of life, and instead we withdraw in order to step back in. So why don't you read number 9?
The senses of social man are different from those of non-social man. Only through the objectively unfolded wealth of human nature can the wealth of subjective human sensitivity, a musical ear, an eye for the beauty of form, in short, senses capable of human gratification, be either cultivated or created. For not only the 5 senses, but also the so-called spiritual senses, the practical senses, will, love, etc., in a word, the human sense, all these come into being only through humanized nature. The cultivation of the 5 senses is the work of all previous history.
Thank you. This is from Karl Marx, from the Economic and Philosophical Manuscripts. So Marx is saying something really powerful here, that even your senses, even the things that you take for granted, are a product of history. They're socialized. Their meaning is also something that evolves. And the reason why I wanted to include this text is because, to follow on what we're just talking about right now, Shabbat is the time that can generate new forms of experience and sense, new ways of connecting to life. We take for granted everything on Friday. We think that the way things are the way things are, and the way things they ought to be. But on Shabbat, we can withdraw from those ways of organizing life, and we can experience a whole radically new way of being through this very specific practice. And then with Havdalah, we step into the darkness because we no longer are illuminated by the old ways of seeing things. Darkness can be scary, but can also be a blank page. And then this time, and this is what's interesting, in Havdalah, we have a special candle, a Havdalah candle, which you will see at one point, which we'll see in this video, that has many strands, and together it makes a flame. And what's interesting is that you cannot make the flame until it's fully dark, until you're not dependent on any external light, like the sun. Instead, the light comes from you. A fire is made by human beings. A fire is made artificially, through artifice, through craft. And there's something powerfully symbolic about that. That now you're the one that illuminates your future and your path. It's no longer the sun or anything else. So if you want to bring it back to Shabbat, we can see that before Shabbat, the way of seeing the world is another person's light, or history's light. Then you come into Shabbat and you withdraw. You don't use electricity, you don't use your phone, you don't spend money, you don't participate in the economy of the world, not just economically, but also in other aspects too. And instead, you just kind of give yourself a break. And you see what arises from that. And then now, when you re-enter on Saturday night, you re-enter the week, you're the one that comes with the light. You're the one that does that flame. And it's a collective flame.
That's really nice. Yeah, really. Like all concept, and not only concept, but seeing inside of each other somehow, like, and being alone with you, and to see different layer of myself, and you see something different yourself again. And every week we again take it, turn it. Every week we make, and I don't make, but I would love to make. And we see each time another thing, and it's beauty.
Thank you. This is the goal of SHIUR 1700, is to share with a wider audience what Jewish practice is to us. And the same way how when you play music to somebody, you don't necessarily play it in order to force them to adopt your instrument. There's also something beautiful about experiencing somebody else's music. You know, I don't have that, maybe because I'm not a musician like you, I don't feel like pushing you off the stage and dancing and singing, right? I just want to sit there and watch you sing. And I benefit from that. And that's kind of what I want to offer people that are not Jewish, is to learn what we're doing, and hopefully it provides you with some insight into our world, and you also will interpret it in your way. And you know, you have your path and we have our paths, and together we create something new, a new flame.
I also like this, what you said, going into the dark, not as something negative, but going into an empty space, which is also, for me as a musician, and for all of us, I guess, very important to stand still for a moment and just keep quiet and be okay with it, not to pursue one step after the other all the time, because when we keep quiet for once and we just pause, we can like do something very new and fresh again, and we feel like, also sometimes I feel like reborn or something when I was in this empty space for a longer time.
On the other hand, we live in a society or in a culture in general where, I mean, everything is kind of pushing us towards not taking this time. By the mode of how we're supposed to work, and always striving for the better, always striving for more, always striving for not only having, but also for being, in a sense of being successful, being your better self, so this optimization. And so, I mean, I think as artists, we know more probably about the worth of letting your mind free at some point and giving rest, because we really need it to be successful, or to be good in what we're doing, and to be also happy with what we're doing. So, and for me, also art is a kind of religion in our days, in some form, because it is something that is actually kind of like pulled out or excluded from those obvious necessities. I mean, we've seen it also in the lockdown now, where like everything kind of like building cars or producing mobile phones or whatever was seen as more necessary than enjoying art or performing art. And I mean, on the other hand, we see so many people have been broken in that time and have been really going to a bad place, because it kind of took away one of those islands where you really could retreat from this daily struggle. And so I think art is very similar to religion in that point.
Okay, thank you. Just to go back to what you said, if you can read number 10, because it's actually very similar.
There is a desire to break with the world in order to embrace life in all its fullness and discover in artistic creativity that which is refused by reality. This is the revelation, or rather the inauguration, of hitherto unsuspected potentialities. This liberation can be felt most intensely by those in whom ethical values are most deeply rooted.
This is from Jacques Blondel, and it's quoted by Georges Bataille in Literature and Evil. So he says something very similar to what you were saying, where in order to embrace life in all its fullness and to discover an artistic creativity that you could not have imagined of, you have to break from life. You have to withdraw. So you have to break from the world. So there's a paradox. Because I love the world so much, I'm going to take a break from it.
There is this balance at that point. I feel like that a lot of happening, but if I go too much for me, then I can't see clearly me, inside of me, or everything. I cannot make meaning, or I cannot feel, maybe too much ecstasy feeling, but like actually not in a drug way, but because I have so many exciting things happening and seeing, and then I need time to feel myself, or how I react inside of me, all these happenings.
So this is perfect, because we can see this in two ways. One is that Shabbat is that break with the world in order to go back into the world, refreshed and with a new way of seeing things. Or going into the world is a way to take a break from Shabbat in order to come back to Shabbat and to experience it in an utterly new way, that it's no longer a burden.
We just don't see it that second way most of the time, right? We see it the other way all the time. Like, okay, I have to go back to normal life. I have to work again. I have to like get better all the time. And it's actually a nice approach to see it the other way. I have to go back in my own space, from time to time.
And the other key part of this sentence here is that the liberation can be felt most intensely by those to whom ethical values are most deeply rooted. So your socialized ethic, the thing that keeps you back from enjoying, that keeps you back from being present, ironically, is the catapult that will catapult you further, right? It's when you have that presence of being pulled down, that when you unleash yourself from that, you feel full liberation. It's the workday that allows the vacation to be full. And the same thing you were talking about with music, where sometimes it's the moments that are a little bit softer that set it up for the more powerful and let's say voluminous moments. Okay?
If there are no rules, there is no liberation, because there's nothing you can be liberated from, because there's just no order, there's nothing.
I think we could all learn something from Shabbat and take this moment of pressure into the life, into the normal life. I like the text like, there's a desire to break with the world in order to embrace life. Sometimes what the artist doing is make a break in life. Like you are make a picture from a normal life, and in this moment, the artist see the beauty in it. It's just like you can make every moment just like Shabbat. You feel it in you.
Beautiful.
Take it. Why only have Shabbat on Friday? I can't imagine to. I mean, you guys only have sex on Shabbat or not? So I mean, it's something you take it with you, and I mean, I don't know what is the Jewish life in that time. How much regulation you have, and how does it like? But
This is exactly what Havdalah is about. About regenerating the rest of the week. So exactly, all these wonderful things of Shabbat are an exercise for after Shabbat. So as you said, you keep the Shabbat within you. And that's something that exists in our tradition. And that's exactly what this ritual, Havdalah, is about that transition, and about not letting it be an end, but about something that you carry with you into the darkness. Can you read number 12, please? You can read actually 12 and 13.
For darkness is a vessel of light, and darkness is also the spiritual light. Only in contrast to the illumination light is it darkness.
Thank you. This comes from a contemporary rabbi and mystic, Rav Yitzchak Meir Erlanger. And what he's saying is a Kabbalistic concept that darkness is a container of light, a vessel of light. And he goes even further, and he says that darkness is a spiritual light. And it's only in contrast to the illuminating light is it darkness. But it's its own type of light. It's a dark light. And this is very aligned with what we were talking about, of not seeing darkness as this dangerous, horrifying space, but rather as something that contains its own unique light. Could you read the next one, please?
According to the strength of darkness and concealment, the two is the strength of light concealed within, that is obtainable through the darkness.
Thank you. So this comes from Reb Tzadok of Lublin, and he says, according to the strength of the darkness, according to the strength of the hiddenness, of the concealment, so too is the strength of the light concealed within. So it is only obtainable through the darkness. And of course, this is very logical, right? Like, if the place is filled with sun and you have a little candle, it doesn't seem very powerful. But the darker the place is, the more powerful the little light is. And that's our point. Next time we experience darkness, that darkness is concealing light. And who makes that light? Do we sit and wait for that light to come down? No. We make that light. Each one of you doesn't contain a flame. You make the flame. And that's really powerful. That's really transformative. That actually changes the whole nature of existence. And that's what Havdalah is about, that separation from darkness to light. From the sacred to the profane, but the profane, the regular, the weekday, not as something to be afraid of, but as something to invite us to illuminate, to bring light to.
The idea of just basically, I think that's what it means, enjoying the darkness. Well, it also helps with music. You see, when you're on stage, when you watch the people, how many people just close their eyes because they just want to hear the music. I was always dreaming of being in a concert hall, and there's no light in the hall. So just the pure music, and nothing that obstructs you from just experiencing it. Well, if you're in the museum at night, if there's hardly any light, it's something very special. So, for example, the night watch that works here, I think they see it completely differently. I've been doing it once or twice with them, not here, but in the museum before, and it changes your perspective, because the statues, when you see them in the moonlight, that's something that nobody ever sees and nobody even thinks about doing it. It's special.
I think this is an incredible metaphor. No matter how dark it is, there's always the moon. The sun is gone, but the moon is still there. And it's something that is really affirming. It's something that's really amazing because we feel very dark in life. We feel very alone. And that darkness is a unique darkness. It's your darkness. It's your path to experience and to find, to make that fire. But if you don't see the fire so easily, look for the stars. If you don't see the stars, look for the moon. And if you don't see them, you know they're still there. And that's something I think that really can invite us to a whole new way of seeing things. Tom, why don't you read number 14?
A lamp for one is a lamp for 100.
This is a very famous line from the Talmud. It's really nice. You only need one light, one flame. A lamp for one is a lamp for 100. But I think there is something intuitive about it, where we realize that that sometimes there is no difference between one person doing something for themselves and doing it for the world. And we don't need to always think in terms of who else is there. They'll benefit from your light. Even if you're writing that song alone, or singing in the shower, or whistling in the forest, the world still is listening. Melis, why don't you read number 16?
A little bit of foolishness shows and reveals the treasure of wisdom and the supernal glory more than any other way in the world.
Thank you. This is a phrase from the Zohar, which is the great mystical book of Judaism, of Kabbalah. And it says, a little bit of foolishness can show and reveal the greatest wisdom more than any other way in the world. What can that mean?
Well, it means that you don't stick to the rules. And that can be very liberating, right? And it also makes everyone else around you very cheerful, because they would like to do the same, but they didn't dare to, probably. And then someone relaxed the whole situation, and you just get a big freedom.
I think that's also something with creativity, where sometimes by being foolish foolish is of course foolish according to a certain standard. There's no like objective foolishness. So what that does is it disrupts and subverts the structure. And then by disrupting and subverting it, you're liberated from that old way of thinking. So ironically, foolishness is the path to wisdom, because wisdom is something that is able to break out of the normal, right? Wisdom is not something that is obvious, or something obvious becomes wise when you don't see it anymore as obvious, and you see it as something that transforms the way you see things. And Shabbat, again, we have to go through that moment of foolishness according to the rest of the world in order to maybe be wiser than the rest of the world.
I also think in order to achieve something on the stage or in a production or for the camera, we always say keep your inside child, right? And inner child, yes. And it could also be connected with just be a bit foolish, you know. Just don't think about the people who are watching you. Just what would you do when you would be a 12-year-old or a 6-year-old, and then the interesting situations come out, and you find the sense in it.
I think Steve Jobs said something like, keep foolish, keep hungry.
Yeah. So the Zohar said it about 800 years or 900 years before. And they didn't wear black turtlenecks, you know. Yeah, and just on that note, I think it is also interesting here today. We're obviously experimenting when it comes to even the practice of mixing text with performance. And Hidalgo's signature is one that embraces the friction between classical content and very contemporary ways of interpreting that. And I think that it's something that we're exploring today, both in real time, you know, as we're doing this now, and also as maybe a way to change the way that we've been looking at things. Who knows how we come out of it, and what light we bring in. Why don't you read number 18?
What happens when we surrender and accept ourselves as we are? A dual relinquishment. of absoluteness and at the same time of the need for it. The second surrender, which minimizes the significance of the first, marks the release from angst and the onset of ecstasy. It is not the ecstasy of truth, but that of life itself, which opens a window onto the vital, infinite joy of all of life. What enables it is the renunciation of the need to grasp, justify, and invoke infinitude. Thus, truth ceases to be a condition for life and becomes a product of life, a feature of its vitality.
Thank you. So this comes from Rav Shagar, a rabbi who died actually relatively recently, an Israeli rabbi. And I'll just focus on a couple parts here. He says that when we release ourselves from the need to find truth, and instead we find ourselves living truth, that truth is no longer a condition for life, but a product of life. So one of the mistaken ways of looking at things is we oftentimes will say, I need to find the truth. And then that truth will justify whatever I want, right? But what he's saying here is truth is something you live. It's something that is a manifestation of your being, rather than something that you invoke. And this brings us back into that Shabbat consciousness. We talked about when Yushan was saying, carry that with you, that bit of Shabbat with you. This is the idea, is that then we suddenly transform the longing that we had for that lost Shabbat into action, into being. And then truth is no longer something that we want to recall or something that we want to chase after, but it's something that we live. And I want to conclude with this idea. And this idea of Havdalah, where we will break with the world in order to come back into a new world. And that new world is not something that is discovered, it's something that is lived. And who else is going to live it but you? Who else is going to light that fire but us? So I want to thank everybody for participating, both as artists, as performers, for giving us this magnificent space. We're so grateful. And thank you all for joining, and to all our viewers. We welcome you to engage with us further. SHIUR at SHIUR International on social media, and also Hidalgo Festival and Ensemble UNO and the Glyptothek. We're all here, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you. And what we say on Havdalah, we say Shavua Tov, it means have a good week. We also say it in Yiddish, a gute Woche, which I think is very similar to German, a gute Woche or a gute Woche. Have a good week. Thank you.